Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honour to be here. The World Centre Innovation Lecture has a great tradition of iconic speakers, and I feel very honoured to have the chance to join that list tonight. The topic, artificial intelligence that is changing the world, is a pretty big topic, and I'm not going to cover more than a slice of that. I'd have to say it's not necessarily a well understood topic. Although going back when we did the App and Float in 2015, I have to say that the level of understanding of AI was pretty well zero. Talking to institutions at the time trying to get traction on the investment. As soon as you mentioned artificial intelligence, their eyes would glaze over. It was all just too difficult. So in a few short years, I think understanding has improved and increased. It's a topic, I think, of interest to all of us. It'll affect our lives, it'll affect corporate life, it will affect governments. In fact, governments are beginning to take proactive steps towards that. Xi Jinping of China says China is to be a world leader in artificial intelligence by 2030. Big goal, and I guess a lot of us would feel that he's on the way to doing that. Vladimir Putin in 2017 said, "The nation which leads in AI will be ruler of the world." So that's how his perspective goes. Elon Musk is a great innovator. Goes a step further. The global arms race for AI will cause World War III. So we'll come back to that theme at the end of the lecture, I guess, as to how we do perceive the effects of artificial intelligence, whether it's positive, whether it's negative, whether it's, I guess, a mix of pluses and minuses. A little disclaimer up front, there's a lot of reference to Appen, I guess the history of Appen, how we started the company, and I want to say that this is not an investor talk. There are no forward-looking statements for investors. There's no comments on Appen's performance. A lot of my comments indeed are personal comments, personal observations, not necessarily belonging to the Appen board, but more my thoughts on AI and the context for it. Okay, so a little bit of I guess, priming the pump. This is the Warren Centre for Advanced Engineering, and I want to talk a bit about engineering to start with, just to warm you up. How does artificial intelligence work? Well, that slide shows, I guess, two examples of AI systems at work. The one on the left is the Go program, AlphaGo, I'm sure some of you know, was developed by advanced computers. The computer program there was programmed with artificial intelligence to train itself, basically. So it played millions of games against itself. It learnt the strategies. It taught itself the rules. The rules were programmed in. It taught itself the strategies, and eventually it beat the world's best player of Go. So that's what we call a closed system, and there's very few examples of AI today that are of that nature. The one on the right requires human data, and almost all artificial intelligence we see today is trained on human-sourced data. If you try to teach a computer to behave like a human, to make decisions like a human, in that case to drive a car like a human, you need to feed it data prepared in a particular way that will teach it human behaviour. So that's, I guess, the core of what Appen does. It provides the data flow to the tech companies and to banks and others that train their algorithms to make decisions as if they were humans. So we do it with a lot of scale. We have, these days we're global, I think as Willie has said. We have a workforce in the cloud of about 1.3 million working on data flows. They currently process 10 billion data points in 180 languages. A lot of it is language-related work. If you're training a search engine, you need natural language interpretation or speech recognition. 130 countries, 70,000 different locations. One interesting aspect is that a lot of that workforce are what we call differently able. To process, for example, image data for autonomous vehicles, you don't need hearing. If you've got mobility issues, you can work at home and be equally productive on our software tools as someone who normally would catch the train to the office. So quite a large proportion of our staff are in that category. We're very proud of that. We deliver three main types of this training data. The first one on the left there is what we call relevance. If you're training search engines or social media, then you need use cases to train the search engine to interpret natural language queries and to respond to your queries. So that's basically text-based. It's very large. It's the largest part of our business. Speech and natural language, as you'll hear, that's the first part of the AI spectrum that we started. Data for speech recognition, synthesis, natural language understanding. Examples of that you'll see today are those personal assistants, chatbots. A lot of vehicles now have speech recognition. We've been part of most of those systems in their development. And the third category, which is a bit newer, but growing very quickly, is image and video. So driverless vehicles, for example, were trained on annotated data that some of which we prepare. So a bit of engineering for you. How does a computer recognise an image? And here I'm going to sort of delve into data science. I'm sure to Willie and the data science experts in the room, it's like a caveman trying to explain it, but I'll have a go. Picture there is, on the left is Abraham Lincoln. It's been coded into pixels, fairly coarse coding. And what the computer sees is that series of numbers on the right. So it doesn't see a picture, it just sees a series of numbers. And if you feed enough images of Abraham Lincoln, all coded into that format, what the algorithms do, they're usually called, these days they're convolutional neural networks, they work like a human brain, they work in layers. It passes a grid over that series of numbers. It looks for edges, it looks for differences in intensity, so that's an edge. It looks for shapes, like circles, and from that it can interpret layer by layer, it will interpret a feature, like an eye or a beard, and eventually it'll compose its own, it'll be trained to recognise that picture as Abraham Lincoln. So if you feed it Abraham Lincoln's picture versus another person, then it should be able to disambiguate between the two. So training data, again, this is getting towards the end of the engineering side of it. There are two types of methodology that the industry has used to train in AI. The one on the top, which we call the old approach, starts with a set of logic. So you say, all right, to recognise Abraham Lincoln, look for people without a beard, without a moustache, but with a beard, with a fairly gaunt face, and you code that into the logic. That takes a lot of work, and then you give it real-world examples to train it. The one on the bottom is called deep learning, which has come more recently. This one here, you don't tell it anything, you just give it lots of pictures of Honest Abe. Say 5,000 pictures of Honest Abe, 5,000 pictures of someone else, and it will train itself to distinguish between Abraham Lincoln and another person. So face recognition would typically work that way. But the key thing is that the more data we feed it under deep learning, the better the performance. So historically, the older algorithms tended to flatten out as you put data in. Incremental values became less and less. With deep learning, that process continues indefinitely, and I guess that underpins the success of our business because there's no shortage of appetite for the training data. So let's go back to a little bit of history. I see I was listed as the speaker as the founder of Apple. I'm actually the co-founder. The actual founder was Julie Vonwiller, who's sitting in the front row. I'm sure a lot of you know her. So how did we start? Well, let me cast you back to Silicon Valley in the 1990s. Those of us that lived through that period, it was, I guess, a fairly unreal experience. There was money everywhere, there was companies being floated with no profit, often with no revenue, and quite extraordinary multiples were being achieved. So during those days, there was a company called Nuance, did a float back in I guess the mid-1990s. Good company, still a customer of Apple today. And it had developed some speech recognition algorithms. Computer power had come to maturity. There's a lot of computer power. These algorithms beginning to work. You could do it in real time. And they set out to develop systems and examples, in fact, to conquer the world in terms of their technology. So they had picked up a contract in Australia with the Queensland TAB, and they needed local partners about 1997. So it's a nice autumn day, sunny autumn day in 1997. Julie Vonwiller is sitting at home. She's doing some consulting on speech technology. There's a couple of phone calls, and this guy called Keith comes to the door from Nuance, and he said, look, we've got this contract, we need a local partner to help develop this and the technology. You're interested to make that happen. And I love the way the Americans would formalise contracts. They'd come to a private house, they'd knock on the door, shake hands, and you're away. And I guess that little episode changed our lives. That was the beginning of Apple. And Nuance was the first significant customer, a very good anchor customer. We worked with them through different parts of the world, different languages, and always with great success. So that little application back in 1997 was to automate telephone betting on horse races. The problem I think the Queensland TAB had at the time was that most professional punters will leave their betting until the last 1 or 2 minutes before the race. I guess they're calculating the odds, they're working out what to do. And then this flood of bets would come in, which the telephone operators basically couldn't handle that load. So there's a high motivation to automate that using speech recognition. So we say betting on the dining room table. This actually started at a home in the North Shore, started on the dining room table. We quickly got some software together. I was working at Turk at the time, as supporting as I could. We had about 12 employees in the house. It just shows the power of these applications. So it was a server-based telephone call center. That was the driver. To help Nuance develop the software acoustic models for speech recognition, needed huge amounts of training data. It has to recognise speakers with all different sorts of accents, male and female, native, non-native speakers, different environments, audio environments. So that's what we helped them do, and then we carried that to, I think the second thing we did for them was they decided to automate call centres in Hong Kong, which required the software acoustic model for spoken Cantonese to be developed. And they'd been to Hong Kong and they'd got partners trying to do it, and were stumbling on it. So again, they threw that in our direction, and we created the Cantonese recognition models in the Haymarket in Sydney, in suburban Sydney, Chatswood and Haymarket, recent arrivals, and we managed to do that within a commercial timescale successfully. So Nuance certainly got the company going. It was all speech recognition in those days, and moved to other things later on. Okay, so having started, I guess, with Silicon Valley, the industry was growing. This was the late 1990s. The European community, bless their heart, when they take to something, they put their arms around their whole industry sector. In this case, the ICT companies, Philips, Siemens, Nokia, Telefunken, the Ericsson. They form a consortium, and they say, we're going to build the recognition software for the world's languages. We're going to form this grand consortium. Everyone's given 2 languages to work on. And the problem that they had was that there was really no reliable commercial support for the data to train these algorithms. So Julie and I went over to Europe. We met with people like Philips and Siemens. And I guess the reaction that we got was, well, we're pleased to see you, but frankly, what do you know about language? We Europeans, that's our heritage. We understand languages, we speak all languages. You guys in Australia speak English. So we managed to get through that. We convinced them we were worth a try. And it formed a great partnership. We rapidly became the majority provider of all the materials for the European Commission projects. Others joined that. Microsoft joined that a bit later on, and people coming in were basically told, if you want to be part of this consortium, you'd better engage Appen to do all your language materials for you. So they were big projects, and again, they gave us a lot more momentum. We moved the company then from the North Shore office, the Bradfield office, Paul, down to the Bradfield location of Chatswood, where the headquarters still are today. So one of the I guess an observation about the Europeans in those days too, that European languages were fine, they had great depth, their linguists had great depth and they understood that. When it came to scripted languages like Chinese, Japanese, Arabic for example, that was a high degree of difficulty. The Europeans tend not to be brought up on those languages, whereas in Australia every second school kid is learning Chinese or Japanese. So to us, to a linguist here in this part of the world, every language is of equal degree of difficulty or simplicity. There are no distinctions. So one of the things they loved about us was that we were quite happy to handle, for example, Japanese and Chinese, whereas their linguists were somewhat timid on that area. So Philips was our first customer from that European project, and they gave us Dutch, their own native language, and Japanese. And we delivered that with great success. One of the languages that emerged is a consortium there called Oriental. So they formed a group of companies to work on moving into the Middle East. So Philips came to us. They picked up some contracts to automate call centres in Dubai and said, can you guys have a go at developing Arabic speech recognition? We said yes, we did, and we got in touch with, I think it was Professor Stuart Campbell of Western Sydney University, who had a lively Arabic department. He got us going, and we put the team together with the linguists, and we became deeply expert in Arabic. Arabic is a wonderful language. It's one of the world's top 5 languages with a great classical tradition of literature and spoken Arabic. And again, I'm not a linguist, but the complexity there is that it comes in 3 layers. The top layer, called classical, is Quranic Arabic. It's very fixed. It's not spoken in the media or the street. MSA, Modern Standard Arabic, is spoken right across the Arabic-speaking world, from North Africa through to the Gulf area and so on. And it's intelligible to all Arabic speakers. And that's a standardised language. It's scripted, it's well understood, it's processed, and that's the bread and butter Arabic that's spoken. But the lower level is colloquial Arabic, which is spoken very regionally. It's spoken in the street, it's spoken among friends and neighbours, and it has no orthographic or written format. Just a little word on US government innovation initiatives. In this part, the first few years of the century, up to about 2010, we were working quite closely with DARPA and TSWG, TSWG. They are great sources of American innovation in science and technology. I think DARPA is well known. DARPA has a wonderful history of innovation. The invention of the internet, for example, came out of DARPA or ARPANET. Global positioning systems, early speech recognition. So we work with them on speech-to-speech translation systems. TSWG has 20 agencies supporting it. Their idea is much shorter term, less than 1 year breakthrough innovation. DARPA tends to be 5-year projects. So we did some projects with TSWG as well. They're very quick to contract. They have a requirement. You pitch for it, 1-page piece of paper, successive processes, and it's all unclassified work. It's all open source. It's all not open source so much, but it's openly gazetted and it's quite publicised. And we found partnerships with these organisations which taught us a lot about innovation and system development in AI. So a couple of things that we did in those days. The one on the left there is an interesting one. They said to us, if we give you a fragment of text, let's say a paragraph out of an email, tell us what sort of person wrote that. Tell us the characteristics of that author. So tell us about his age, his or her age, gender, are they a native speaker? If it's written in English, this is a Latino speaker writing in English. How much education have they had? Is this person living in the United States or some other country? So we had to basically detect that and put probabilities to it. They said, furthermore, we want you to tell us what sort of psychometric profile this person might have. They're the 5 psychometric parameters, the big 5. So that's a classic machine learning AI exercise. What we did there was we generated thousands of emails from known authors. Those authors all volunteered their emails. They volunteered to go through psychometric testing, so we had those elements. We knew the demographics, and then you put this through the algorithms to train it. In this case, it was support vector machines, and it develops the relationships between those different parameters. So that project was took about 2 years, but it was quite successful and may well be used today. The one on the right is an analogy of that. It's called data stream profiling. And they said, we want you there to when someone's typing on a keyboard, can you tell us, is this someone we know already? We have a keyboard signature, just like Morse code operators might have a signature. Are they left-handed, right-handed, are they experienced typists, or whatever? So again, a very similar but slightly unusual project. So a little bit of, I guess, looking back then as to what are the things that made us successful through that period. I guess the first one, obviously, was we recognised this niche for data. When we started the company, there was lots of startups doing work in speech technology, some developing systems, some in developing applications. They all had, I guess, their own measures of success. We spotted the fact that there was no reliable commercial source of data flow, and that was the thing the companies needed. If you're launching a new product, let's say you're Microsoft with Xbox launching a new game in 2 years' time, and you want it to work in 3 or 4 different languages, whoever's providing the material to develop those acoustic models has to do it to a reliable timescale and a reliable cost, a defined level of quality. So we're able to do that. And that niche, I guess, is a huge niche today, but it was very focused at the time. Interestingly, we didn't get defocused on government programs of support. There are a lot of innovation programs running around. We found that the effort to document those, go through the processes, was too distracting. So we, apart from the export development grants, we put that aside. We also, going global with this data collection to process the data, in this case mainly audio data for speech, required development of new strategies to make that happen at scale. So again, we had to develop those from scratch and at a commercial price. The third one I've got there is quality of the Australian linguists and computer scientists. I would rate the quality of the linguists coming out of Australian universities, and indeed the IT graduates and AI graduates today, to be world class. And we know that because when we take these people over to the most advanced US customers, there was immediate interest and engagement as to what they could do for them. So that was a key ingredient. Linguistics is an interesting area. It's I guess this, back in sort of 10 or 15 years ago, it was, you did it for love. There weren't a lot of jobs. We were by far the biggest employer of linguists in the world. These days, because of AI and because of the language interfaces in AI, linguistics is hugely in demand. There's one project, one customer we're talking to that I think has a requirement for 500 linguists. So this is now mainstream. Number 4 was the availability in Sydney of computer literate native speakers. I think Sydney is unique in terms of the range of languages that can be supported here, and we've done some pretty unusual ones. These are students, these are backpackers, these are postdoctoral people with deep computer skills that became part of our team. And the last one I'd have to say, without being critical, is flexible employment structures. We would never have got this company off the ground were it not for the ability to, because it was those days largely project related, wave after wave of different languages, the ability to employ students who could work for 20 hours a week, backpackers who had work restrictions but were available, a lot of postdoctoral students, postgrad students. We did apply some 457 visas to get best of breed AI specialists. That worked, and I guess today we're of course a very large tax-paying Australian enterprise. We employ hundreds and hundreds of staff, professional staff, and people around the world. But that platform of employment structure certainly worked for us. So having now got the company going, we had to scale up, and the two steps we took to make that happen were firstly to globalise the operations instead of trying to do it all in Sydney, which just couldn't supply the growth of people we needed and some of the number of languages. We went to India. I went over there, Julie went over there. We interviewed some partners, and I have to say we found the willingness and the flexibility to partner with some of the BPO operators there to be quite extraordinary. We had a large Silicon Valley customer on board, wanted US English processed very quickly with millions and millions of files. So from the time that we shook hands in Bangalore to the time that we actually had the thing running, 50 employees, fully trained, all the servers linked, software developed, took 6 weeks. So that was the speed that you needed to work with. About the same time, Amazon had launched a product called Mechanical Turk, which was a global platform to match people who needed micro tasks done with people that were interested to provide it. So it was a little sort of you could bid a price and you get some work, piecemeal work. So that was the birth of crowdsourcing, and we then segued in due course to a crowdsourced Appen workforce. Different to Mechanical Turk. With us, we recruited people, they stayed with us, we trained them, we helped them develop quality standards, but that again gave us a huge reach and depth and the ability to turn quickly in different language groups as our customers required it. So having then moved into speech in a big way, I guess we were by far then the largest provider of speech recognition training systems. Convergence then required other modalities, so text, content relevance, image and video. And we did a couple of acquisitions on the way that gave us a bit more reach in those areas. So what a large Silicon Valley customer would want, at least I can't actually mention names here because our customers are a bit sensitive, but I can say that 8 of the world's 10 largest tech companies are customers, so we know pretty well the sort of things they require. They want interfaces in all modalities. So the three main ones, coming back to that as I mentioned earlier, are search relevance. If you're training a search engine is quite a complex beast. In fact, it's multiple beasts. When you put a natural language query in, it will offer you a ranked order of responses. It'll offer you what it thinks are the best advertisements to match that. It'll give you maps. It will eliminate spam, and all these different engines come together on your screen in response to that search. But the problem is that it has to interpret your query as a human would interpret it. If I put into the search engine, where can I get World Cup tickets? It says, what World Cup does it mean? I mean, there's a Rugby World Cup, probably not that one. There's T20 men's cricket, there's T20 women's cricket. There's a Volleyball World Cup going on in Japan. There's a Badminton World Cup coming up, I think, in Switzerland in a year or two. So every time you put a query in, it has to be trained on what's the contextual framework. What are the political, current affairs events, what movies are showing, what TV is showing, what's going on social media. That's why training data is needed. So there's an enormous appetite of real-time training data going to these search engines so that the query this week is interpreted correctly. The same query in a month's time will have probably a different set of responses because the environment has changed. So that's what we do under relevance. Speech and language, going back to that deep learning and constant improvement. I guess when we first started this business in speech recognition, we tended to think, well, once you've done US English, you might go on to UK English, Australian English, do French, and German, maybe do Mandarin, a few others, and kind of that's it. These things are done. The interesting thing is that after 20 years, the biggest source of demand for us by far is US English, still. It's just this issue of ongoing improvement. Started off with telephone recognition of speech, moved on to embedded software. You have to train the systems on male speakers, female speakers, different age groups. Are they native speakers of the language or non-native? If it's in a vehicle, then you've got all the extraneous noise, the road noise, that changes road by road. If it's wet, the windscreen wipers are on. So all the time, the algorithms have to distinguish between the speech which it wants and all the extraneous noise. And that requires huge amounts of data. So speech and language is coming of age with things like the chatbots. A bit more about that later on, these personal assistants. Obviously, entertainment systems in vehicles, navigation systems. It's still a large part of the business. Image and video, it's a more recent one for us. This is an example of the sorts of things that our software tools are required to do. If you're training, for example, in automotive autonomous driving, we have to identify every single car there in the picture. They're identified individually. We do a lot of that automatically now. The trees we're not interested in, so there's no annotation or there's no particular identification of tree by tree. The one on the right is a slightly different example. These are real world examples from things we're doing today. This is an application to allow a supermarket operator to replenish the stocks on the shelf. So here the camera will go down and will identify gaps in the shelf. They have to be trained to do that. It will identify where there's some items on the shelf, but it's low stock. So both of which need to be restocked. So those bounding boxes, red and yellow in that case, are the things that the algorithm is being trained to do. Okay, so back to speech interface, natural language recognition. I guess many of us have these little personal assistants sitting on the shelf at home, Amazon Alexa and Google Home. They're cute little devices. No one would have predicted that there'd be a demand for these things. As Jeff Bezos said, if I'd gone to market research and said, would you be interested in having a little cylinder on the shelf at home? It's always on listening to you. You can turn your lights on and off with it. Maybe it'll tell you the weather forecast and the cricket scores. He said people would have said, no thank you. They'd look at me strangely and say no. So he conceived that. I give him enormous credit for the vision. And of course, they've just taken off. That speech interface is now remarkably facilities. It recognises all speech. It seems to recognise different languages. I've got a little 2-year-old granddaughter in New York who uses this thing. She talks to it and she wants a bit of music played, a dinosaur song, responds to her. It's actually in their house. It's sitting just above the microwave. She talks to the microwave thinking that's the machine. But for kids, I think that's just part of their natural heritage growing up. They're totally at home with these devices. They are very strong. You've all seen chatbots, text-based chatbots as you go on a website, maybe booking a flight or doing some commerce. That's a natural language recognition system. It's very good in a closed domain if there's a limited number of responses. These little personal assistants, by the way, are being rolled out for care of the elderly. So, have you taken your tablets? How are you feeling today? Do you want me to reorder your prescription for you? even as a companion tool. So they're quite effective now in providing for people at home, under telemedicine, telehealth, providing companionship and first-line medical support. Autonomous vehicles requires massive amounts of data. I guess we're all interested in that. They're coming. The Society of Automotive Engineers has defined 5 levels of autonomous driving. Level 1 is really basic. That might be parking sensors. It might be lane keeping. A lot of cars have lane keeping now. Rattle the steering wheel if you cross the lane. Level 2 is things like adaptive cruise control. So again, a lot of cars, not just top-end cars, now have quite a lot of level 2 features. Level 3 and 4 is where it gets interesting. Level 3 is partial automation, and the automotive manufacturers are on the verge of bringing out level 3. Level 3, for example, you'll activate it when you're on the freeway, on the highway. It will drive sedately in the right lane for you. It'll go out and pass if you want it to pass. It'll choose a spot to go out, it'll pass, come back in again. And it's sometimes called eyes off, because the driver, once you engage it, you can read a book, you can watch a movie. You've got to be awake and alive in case it reverts back to you, but you don't need to supervise the car in that closed environment. If you go off the highway, of course, it'll deactivate and it won't do a roundabout or suburban roads. So that's just about here. There's a lot of manufacturers now, I think in the next 12 months will bring out level 3. Level 4 is pretty well what the goal is. Level 4 is sometimes called mind off. You can go to sleep, basically. It'll engage it. It will do everything you need. As long as you're in that closed environment, if it's typically a major highway. Elon Musk reckons he can drive from New York to Los Angeles with his cars already on level 4. So level 4 is again looking at the major manufacturers. The Germans say next 2 or 3 years. Some people say 2021, but it's imminent. Elon Musk, you can buy a Tesla today with that feature on it. I think it costs about $8,500 on a Tesla 3. And what he's provided there is the framework for it. He provided all of the chips, but not yet all of the software functionality. He downloads that onto the vehicle. Level 5 is the ultimate goal, whether we ever get there or not. Level 5 is the car has no steering wheel, no controls. It's like a robo-taxi. In fact, you probably don't even own it. So that's driving a lot of request for support. It's part of our business, supporting the automotive sector. There we've got on the left there just a bit of, again, curation of the data to recognise parked cars, sidewalk, pedestrian. On the right is another step further with LiDAR. LiDAR is like radar and sonar, light detection and ranging. It's 3D, processing of 3D images as the car goes along, which again manages the environment and manages the autonomous system. Those of you that have been to Silicon Valley, if you're in Silicon Valley, you'll see Waymo, which is the Google subsidiary, driving its autonomous vehicles with the LiDAR things on the roof of the car. There's usually someone in the car to give you reassurance, but by and large it's an autonomous vehicle. That's another example, again, for a real-world example that we work on. The one on the left there is the requirement for the vehicle to detect and interpret speed limits. So they often vary, so you've got to pick it up, interpret it, control it. The one on the right is a bit more complex. That's trying to teach the vehicles how to deal with temporary disruptions to the road system. In this case, it's a detour due to roadworks or whatever. So again, trying to annotate the different features there, and that goes back to train the algorithms. So let me move on now away from that and more to, I guess, the societal elements in this. As Paul Fletcher has said, and I'm sure you know, with 5G, with billions of data generating points, there's going to be an avalanche of data, all of which will support potentially autonomous systems. Cloud computing, lots of AI machine learning applications. So it will affect every industry and every part of society. It will disrupt. There's Mr. Bezos. He's already disrupted books, as you know. He's disrupted retail, e-commerce. He's bought Whole Foods in the States, so he's moving into groceries. And he's got his hit list of 7 industries, which he says he will get Amazoned. He's got a little phrase saying, he looks at industry, he says, your margin is my opportunity. I think top of his list, interestingly, is pharmacies. So he's bought a pharmacy chain, and you can expect, like booksellers, he will seek to disrupt pharmacies. Small loans is another one, with the bank system for small loans. So disruption is inevitable. There's a lot of work going on that. McKinsey have their 12 sectors. There are lots of charts that show which ones will have the biggest impact. Predictive maintenance, for example, energy, telecoms, that's pretty well documented. I was at a talk with Andy Penn, CEO of Turk, a while ago, and he had a little phrase there which I wrote down: if you're not already a technologist, you'd better become one. If you're running a company today, unless you understand the technology, unless you come to terms with how it can disrupt you, you'll be overrun. And there's a lot of research that shows that I think only 1 in 5 companies today have really grasped that concept of what's likely to happen. So there's massive investment in AI. I think the figure I saw recently from IDC was 38 billion US investment today in AI applications. In 2023, 93 billion. So huge growth and huge economic consequences. I think at a societal level, again, I suspect we're a little bit behind the pace in coming to terms with where this will lead to, and we need to think about that. Bill Simpson-Young of the Gradient Institute, I think, is here today with Tiberio. There we go. The Gradient Institute was set up recently to look at this very issue, the ethics and societal implications of AI. And it's a serious challenge. We at Apple certainly are conscious of that. If you're using human source data to develop an application, recognise that all humans are biased. So the data that you're feeding in is going to create biased applications. How do you counter that bias? That's the challenge. I mean, there's a good example, a famous example from Amazon. They announced that they had terminated their recruitment tool. They developed a very smart AI recruitment tool to front-end resumes, trained on data over the past 5 years of hundreds and hundreds of applications. The problem was that almost all of their workforce coming in, because of the natural background in terms of education availability, were male. So the algorithms, unknown to Amazon, were anything to do with female applicants. If an applicant said, you know, magna cum laude from Stanford, and by the way, I was president of the Women's Chess Club, bottom of the pile. So because historically they had recruited males, the algorithms were trained unconsciously to prefer male applicants. So when they discovered that, they turned it off very quickly. So I'm sure Bill and Tiberio can give you other examples of where bias unconsciously is creeping in. So we need an ethical framework. Data 61 has produced, I think it's an Australian government, a draft ethical framework with those 8 key points: generate net benefits. On balance, it might do some harm, but it will do some good. It has to be net positive, do no harm. Regulatory compliance, privacy and security, fairness, transparency, of course. What's this algorithm doing? What's the input and output? Contestability. If you're affected by it, I want to go back and see how that came about. How did this happen? How did it affect me? And accountability. Someone needs to be accountable for it. So these key dimensions. I see Dina Schiff, my colleague Dina Schiff, in the audience. The Australian government has just had an ARC Centre of Excellence established I think, Dina, it's called automated decision making and impacts on society. Dina's the chair of the advisory committee. So this is the sort of debate which we need as a society, government, industry, to come to terms with. Where is all this leading? I guess that's the question I really want to throw to the audience today. There's no source of golden wisdom on this one. Everyone will have different views. So my last slide then is really, should we be optimistic? As we saw, implementation of AI is accelerating, it's irreversible, it's happening. Will machines replace humans? Yes, that will happen. Again, McKinsey's study says that looking at the US market, that it will replace millions of human jobs, but they said on balance it will create more jobs than it removes. So McKinsey analysis suggests on the whole it will be beneficial for jobs. I mentioned that Alan Turing of Bletchley Park fame in 1950 proposed a thing called the Turing test. He said if you put a screen in front of a person, the other side of the screen is a computer, and you've got a keyboard and you can talk to it through the keyboard. Will there be a point of time where your conversation with this computer, you can't tell whether it's a person or a machine? And as we've seen earlier, the chatbots are getting better and better. They're still pretty close, but there are many data scientists who now think that that Turing test has been reached. That machines are so useful, and we should think then, how will that replace jobs? How will that replace customer-facing individuals? Looking further ahead, there's a concept called technological singularity, which people write about. This is where computers are so powerful that basically, in simple terms, they're smarter than a human. But in AI terms, they will train systems without you being aware of it. They'll get better and better, and they'll totally separate themselves from human supervision. So, maybe that's a scary prospect. I think a poll they did a while ago of 11 sort of deep thinkers in this area, the consensus was maybe in the period 2040 to 2050, there'll be a 50% chance of us reaching that. Maybe quantum computing might make it earlier. So certainly today there are machine learning systems that will train themselves. So you don't need any intervention. They will get better and better, and in some ways they will not be dependent on you. So are you an optimist or are you a catastrophist in this area? I think some opinion leaders have different views on this. Stephen Hawking, before he died, he was certainly not too enthusiastic about the longer-term context of AI. He said the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. Elon Musk, who's we said earlier, I guess, has some fairly extreme views. He's one of the world's great innovators, but in this area, Elon Musk has warned AI is our biggest existential threat. So he said basically we've got to go to Mars to escape this. Bill Gates is, I guess, more balanced. He said AI is both promising and dangerous. The power of AI is so incredible it will change society in very deep ways. Some good, some bad. The bad, by the way, was weapon systems. He saw the application of AI to weapon systems is a serious threat. And how do you regulate that? How do you control it in terms of a global adversarial situation? Jack Ma, who I have a lot of time for, if you want to go online, there's the Artificial Intelligence Conference in Shanghai at the beginning of September, I think it was, had a debate between Elon Musk and Jack Ma. You can see it on the web. Absolutely diametrically opposed people. As I said, Elon Musk tends to be a catastrophist in this area. Jack Ma, founder of Alibaba, a very smart guy, I think, quite wise. He's an optimist. He said this will be benefit for society. In fact, a little quote he gave, he said, computers may be clever, but human beings are much smarter. We invented the computer. I've never seen a computer invent a human being. So it's worth having a look at. But anyway, that's the thought. I want to leave you with that thought today. Artificial intelligence is here. It's affecting every layer of our society, from government down to even unskilled workers. We need to think about it, and we need to engage with it. I personally am an optimist. Thank you very much.